I've been working with the farm workers in predominantly Watsonville now for about the last 20 years since I finished my PhD. And what I did was I studied the migrant circuit under NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. And what I learned was most disturbing, that this country, and with Clinton's signature, signed a trade agreement that literally forced people off of their land in Mexico. And the reason why this is so disturbing is because Mexico, for 7,000 to 9,000 years that we know about, had a completely sustainable form of farming with the corn, bean, and squash intercrop that supported generations and generations of civilizations and families. And so to run people off their land in this way, especially without their input, I felt was completely unethical. And I know we're short on time, but and so I won't go into all the details. However, I did come up with a summary of NAFTA and immigration, 18 steps to forced undocumented immigration to the U.S. So what we have then, especially in the late 1990s and 2000s, is this huge influx of undocumented immigrants from Mexico, and people not understanding why they were coming, and in fact blaming them for breaking our immigration laws, when in fact this country was the one that set in motion the constraints that forced them to leave their farms under duress. The suffering has been terrible, and I'll address that shortly. But excuse me, NAFTA is part of the current neoliberal economy, and this is a capitalist global economy that basically uses labor extraction to produce goods cheaply but of good quality, and then send them all over the world. So in other words, there's exploited forms of labor everywhere. For instance, China is known for making clothes, and in Bangladesh, for the people that are doing the work, getting next to nothing and barely able to survive. And this is common all through the world now with this form of neoliberal capitalism. It's interesting because I spent the month of February in Cuba on a birding trip, of all things. And what fascinated me was the social dynamic, because what I found was the fact that everyone had their basic needs met. Everyone had enough to eat, a place to live. Anybody, including the people on our tour, could walk into any doctor's office and get treatment, and go from place to place even as we went along and get treatment. And that it was remarkable how the races mixed with one another. I was just shocked. I've never been in a society where there's such little segregation, and there's so many marriages between all different combinations of people just everywhere. So if you get a chance, go to Cuba, because I think that it may not be the answer, but at least it presents an alternative. And one of the things that is stressed when I was in Cuba, and I was very impressed with, is that people's well-being and the environment are the primary priorities. The economy and profit and all of the stuff that runs our economy are not number one. What's number one is people's well-being, and also the environment and preserving it. And there's all these different wildlife centers to restore this animal and that animal. And I mean, it was very inspiring. I've never been in a society like that. I highly recommend going. So that's an alternative. And then I should mention the Mondragon Cooperative. I don't know if you've heard of that. You might want to look it up. In Spain, I just learned today that there are 100,000 people. It's so successful. And it started out with one priest and 6 people that were unemployed that didn't know what to do or how to support themselves. And now it's mushroomed into this global center for cooperative enterprises. So that possibly is another alternative, because I feel that the agricultural system that we have that employs the farm workers that I've been working with all these years is a failed and unsustainable system. It's absolutely not working, and it's really not working for anyone. The only group that I think it could possibly be conceived as working for are the agrochemical industries. However, when you are dumping approximately 1.1 billion to 5.1 billion pounds of poison all over the planet, their children will pay the price regardless. So it's an unworkable system, and I encourage you, since you appear to be such a forward-looking audience, I encourage you to work on and think of other alternatives in which people's well-being and the environment are key, because without a biosphere that's functioning, nothing will survive. We've lost half the wild animals on this planet since 1970, and we cannot continue in this mode. We must do something different. So, along with the fact that the farming system, the industrial farming system that we have in this country is dysfunctional, I would also argue that farm workers are slaves in this system. This is a form of slavery. In fact, I've told people if I ever get some time from all the responsibilities of running a nonprofit, I would like to write a book called Slavery in Your Own Backyard. And it's sort of like what Andy mentioned earlier. It's not a direct form of slavery. It's based on various subtleties that keep people trapped and from which escape is nearly impossible. And I've studied this for many years, and I have discovered laws, regulations, policies, institutions, and rules that are irrational, really, and keep people stuck so they cannot get out of farm work. Not only that, many of these laws extend to the next generation, to their children. And I'll give you an example. I'm very upset about this. There is the use of chlorpyrifos. I don't know if you've heard of chlorpyrifos. This is a potent insecticide, pesticide, and it's rampantly used in the Salinas Valley. Now, it used to be available. In 2000, you could go into a Home Depot and anybody could buy chlorpyrifos. It was sold under the name Dursban or Lorsban. And when I would go to Mexico and do my research, I would find very colorful containers of this stuff that had been used and then just tossed. And the kids, because they have no toys, would go and pick these up to play with. And of course, then eventually, especially if they put water in and try to drink out of it, they'd get some form of poisoning. But the studies were done at that time, and it was recognized that chlorpyrifos is a powerful neurotoxin that interferes with the development of the brain and spinal column in children. So it was banned at that point, 2000, 2001, for residential use. And lo and behold, the surprise I had when I learned that this stuff is being used everywhere in the Salinas Valley. It's one of the most commonly used insecticides. Now, I don't know if you've heard of the Chamacos research scientists at Berkeley. but they did a 17-year study of the mothers and the children in the Salinas Valley, and they've actually come up with a numerical correlation between how much of this chlorpyrifos pesticide that a woman is exposed to during her pregnancy and the loss of her fetus's IQ. So what they found was that for every 522 pounds of chlorpyrifos a pregnant woman is exposed to within 1 kilometer, and some are exposed to thousands of pounds, I should add that. The fetus, by the time it gets to age 7, will have lost 2.2 points of IQ. And so if she's exposed to thousands of pounds, you can just multiply that, 8 points of IQ, whatever. And I question why we're not hearing about this. I never see any press on this, and to me this is outrageous. The EPA was due to cancel chlorpyrifos, at least in the state of California, on March 31st this year. And lo and behold, Scott Pruitt reversed it, so we can continue doing it. Now, part of the reason this breaks my heart is because every farm worker I have ever talked to wants their kids educated and out of farm work. The thing that gets them out of bed at 5 a.m. and into those fields for 10 to 13 hours a day is that they're doing this so their kids can become educated. So what are the kids exposed to? Chlorpyrifos, so they're already intellectually deficient by the time they're ready for school. Then they go to the surrounding schools, and since this chlorpyrifos is drift prone, it moves through the air right into the classrooms and further damages the brains and spinal cords of these children. So what kind of future can they look forward to? Well, if they can't think, then we have the next generation of farm workers. I don't know about you, but that's terribly disturbing to me. So that's one constraint that I found. And this is legal. How can this be legal? In Salinas, I mean, how far is Salinas from here? 30, 35 miles? I feel like this is equally as bad as Flint, Michigan, and not to diminish Flint, Michigan by any means. I mean, it's a horror what happened there. But we hear about Flint, Michigan, and we hear about the Standing Rock Sioux. And this example of environmental racism, since 91% of the children are Latino, is right here in our own backyard. And I have never, ever in any paper seen an article written about just what I just told you. I really think that we need to do something about this. It really bothers me. Another constraint is the state-run migrant camps. We have 24 state-run migrant camps. They provide wonderful housing. It's nothing fancy, but it's clean, it's livable, it's well kept up. It's affordable. You can rent a 3-bedroom for, I think, $375. So the state subsidizes it. However, the constraint is as follows. When the migrants can only come back, like the Buena Vista migrant camp down here off Harkin Slough Row, they can only come back May 1st. They have to leave by the end of November. Now, if you're a parent and you want your kids educated and out of farm work, you are distressed to have to leave, and not only do they have to leave, they have to move at least 50 miles away. So every child, and I know, don't ask me why, I've been up to Sacramento, the Housing and Community Development Department, we've done ethnographic research, we've presented, And their response is, we don't know where it came from and we're not going to change it. So again, they fall further and further behind. Some of the families that I work with have children that go to 4 schools in 1 year, in 2 different countries, in 2 languages, in 2 cultures. Now, no one can succeed academically in that situation. So they fall further and further behind, and when they're faced with what choice do I have in life, guess what? They become farm workers. I've seen it go on generation after generation. And so again, it's not, we don't have the kind of slavery where a white person owns black bodies like we did in the South, but we've got these laws, institutions, rules, and regulations that keep people trapped and maintain the same form of slavery 1 generation to the next. It's really tragic. Okay, now I hear a lot, I'll shift the discussion here a bit. I hear a lot from the Trump administration about getting rid of undocumented workers. All of these people that were run off their land by NAFTA and have come up here in the late 90s and early 2000s, all of them are working in farm work. The farm labor force in this state is about 75% undocumented. In Santa Cruz County, we have about 13,000 farm workers, and of those, 83% are undocumented. Now, this state provides 2/3 of the nation's nuts and fruits, and it supplies 1/3 of the nation's vegetables. Who is going to do that work if these people are deported? And they are leaving, by the way. They are leaving in droves because they're sick and tired of being under the gun with the new administration, and also being told that things like all Mexicans are rapists and murderers. I mean, you have to ask yourself, would I want to live in a country like that? I don't think so. And yet, they're doing us a huge favor. Every time you eat nuts, fruits, or any kind of vegetables, you are eating the work of these farm workers. And I noticed that in Santa Cruz County, we are very concerned about organic and non-GMO, which is wonderful. However, very few people are interested in the conditions and the lives of the people who do the work, the hard work of harvesting. And I just feel very strongly that anybody that's worked for several months in this grueling kind of work in the hot sun, 10 hours a day, etc., no one in that situation should be worried about deportation. Who is doing who the favor? Really? Do we want to get out there and do that work? I don't think so. Beyond that, they're paid so very little. Do you know, in the 20 years I've been working on this, there has not been a pay increase. So they make between $13,000 and $20,000 a year. Now, they cannot afford rents in Watsonville, even of dumps. I mean, some of the places I've been in, and we're talking grinding poverty. And so what they do is they cram more and more people into a given unit so they all can share the cost of the rent. And in this one family, a Oaxacan family or household, there are 16 people with children living in 1,000 square feet with one bathroom. Imagine living like that. They have no health insurance whatsoever. I have found the Women's Health Collective and the East Cliff Family Clinic charges minimally, and they don't have enough money to buy a decent diet, a decent amount of food and quality food. And not only that, this last winter it was tragic because in the Oaxacan community, which are the bottom, they're the most recent migrants, and they're the poorest of the farm workers. This last winter, they were actually starving. And I asked them, why don't you go to the food bank and get money, get some food? I mean, nobody has, and they're afraid to leave. So I went into this one household, and the kids were hungry and crying and asking for food. And I looked at the mom like, well, give them some food. And she just kind of looked down. And on impulse, I went over and opened the refrigerator. There was about this much of a gallon of milk, 1 head of lettuce, and 2 very small Jell-O containers. That was all in this refrigerator. And so I called the Community Action Board, and we got a hold of the head, Kevin Hooser, who's head of the food bank, and told him about the situation. And I asked the family, is this what's going on throughout the Oaxacan community? And they said, yes, there's no work. It's just been raining constantly. So anyway, he made provisions to bring food to 130 families at an undesignated location so they could feel safe. But the insecurity, I just want to speak to that, the insecurity of that. And also the insecurity of not knowing as a parent if ICE is going to come and deport you and leave your children and you may never see them again. These are things that most of us cannot even imagine, but they live with all of these constantly. Potential hunger, no health insurance, overwork, crowded conditions. I always think of farm workers as not only is labor being extracted, but they actually their life expectancy is greatly diminished. The average age of a farm worker at death is 49 years. And so the way I see it is they come, I have this image in my mind. They come across the border, they manage to get across the border, they get on a conveyor belt in which they're subjected to overwork, no health insurance, poor diet, crowded conditions, et cetera, and then at age 49 they fall off, they're thrown away, and new ones keep coming. And in fact, Mexico and California are a binational system of reproduction and production. Reproduction of farm workers in Mexico and production of capital here in the United States. So we have this labor force that's consistently exploited. Now, I should mention too, I wanted to talk a little bit more about, I wanted to talk about glyphosate. Does everyone know about glyphosate that I won't talk about? Okay, everyone's heard of Roundup. Everyone's heard of Roundup, right? Okay, glyphosate has finally been listed as a Prop 65 carcinogen by the Organization of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment. So it finally has that status. Even though the pressure is to keep it on the market, I take all of this information to Costco. I like Costco. I think they're really good with students especially. They give flexible hours and so on, and a lot of farm workers can afford what they have there. But, excuse me, but they sell Roundup. And I took the data and went into the manager's room and said, gentlemen, they were all men, you're peddling death, because people don't know that they can get non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. from this. And I also made up my very own fluorescent stickers, warning, contains a carcinogen. So whenever I see Roundup, I mean, don't you think it's unconscionable that we've been told it's as safe as salt since, excuse me, the 70s, and then people use it and get non-Hodgkin's lymphoma and die. I think that's unconscionable. Don't you? I mean, really, we need to clean this mess up that we're part of. Okay, most of Monsanto's Roundup is applied to genetically, excuse me, modified corn. And I wanted to mention too, regarding health, there's two researchers up at the California Institute of Rural Studies that feel that farm workers would be much healthier and live longer if they just stayed in Mexico. They said that the longer they're in California, the sicker they get. So they leave the worst of the third world, they come here and encounter the worst of the first world. And I should mention too, another source of stress is that in any given family, most families have 3 immigration statuses among their members. So you'll have a father, typically with a green card, a mother who's undocumented, maybe a couple of kids that are undocumented, and any born here are citizens. So they're all eligible for different services, which is very, very difficult. And then I should mention too that in terms of mental health of Latinos in general is terrible in the culture at large. 48% of Mexican American children born in this country develop at least one psychiatric disorder. And that's usually anxiety, depression, schizophrenia. I mean, it's just rampant, half the population. And 1 in 6 young Latinas attempts suicide in this country. Again, these are stats right out of the NIH that we never hear about. I mean, this should be headline news, and we should all be working to find out what is so stressful that these things are happening. I personally live my life as if we're all connected, and I think that I guess some people are, I was talking with a friend about this, I guess some people can do the thing of, I'm going to get mine and to hell with the rest of the world. There's that attitude. But then there's some of us that really are tuned in to other people's well-being, and we feel better when other people are doing well. And I tend to think that's probably the natural way it is, since we are social animals. But anyway. So I'd like to mention a few. I should mention too, why isn't anybody winning in this farming system? Okay, the growers themselves, of course, farm workers have it the worst. I mean, there's no question, hands down. Growers even have a problem because they're competing in this area with strawberry growers all over the world. So if in Taiwan they start growing berries cheaper than they grow them here, then they'll be shipped from Taiwan in the global economy and put on the shelves here and undercut then the prices that the growers have always gotten and put them out of business. So the grower situation economically is precarious. Consumers, we just unwittingly purchase the produce of a population of slaves, basically, that is in a state of constant pain and suffering, from what I've observed. Thank you. 2 minutes. Okay. And also, because we can't even have the products labeled as to GMO or not, or what chemicals they might contain or not, we don't know what's in the food and how it's going to affect our health. So we're completely kept in the dark. I mean, even some organic food has some of this chlorpyrifos I talked about earlier. Now, the environment, I already mentioned, 1.1 to 5.1 billion pounds of this junk dumped on the environment yearly. And we're losing forests at the rate equivalent to 48 football fields a minute. Again, this is completely unsustainable. We cannot continue in this vein. So aside from the biochemical industries, nobody is winning. We need a new system of farming. And I recommend agroecological farming in cooperatives and having the farm workers be incorporated into the labor system. In fact, there's 2 excellent studies. If you get a chance, go to the library or look online. Rodale Institute 30-year study. They did a study and found that if we converted overnight to organic, we could feed everybody on the planet. The UN came out just recently with another excellent study. So why are we doing it this way? If we converted to these other things, we could mitigate climate change by 40%. 40% of greenhouse gases come from industrial agriculture. This is madness. It's like sowing our own demise. So the good news, and then I'll be quiet, there's tremendous increased demand for organic. Over 30% of the agriculture in this county now is organic. Lorena Gonzalez got AB 1066 through, and that will give farm workers overtime pay. I nearly fell off my chair when I heard this. Yay! It doesn't start until 2019, but at least it's on, it's something. Oh, there are global marches against Monsanto going on yearly now. I mean, there's one on the 20th, as I understand it. A federal judge in Mexico City banned the marketing of GMO corn in Mexico as, quote, an imminent threat to the environment in 2013. We have ALBA, the Associated Land-Based Agriculture. You've heard of them. They train farm workers to become organic farmers. We have the Food Revolution website by Ocean and John Robbins. If you want to be inspired, go on that website. It's really exciting. We've got 10 bills that have been introduced to the California State Legislature offering broad range of aid to undocumented people. There's even a bill to make the entire state a sanctuary state, which I love. And then the Center for Farm Worker Families, the Food Empowerment Project, and Human Agenda, plus two attorneys, are bound and determined to get rid of this 50-mile regulation. So we will follow that until next time I talk to you. I'll let you know where we are with that, but we're going to get rid of that. And then there's press conferences and demonstrations going on to eliminate Central California racism, which I think is fabulous. So there's a lot going on here. We're like a harbinger of enlightenment, and I really appreciate all the efforts all of you are putting in that regard. So thank you very much.